Yes, guys, welcome back to another video. I've got, again, a little bit of a different one today. I want to go through an article that I just came across during the week. It's relating to sort of, different positions in the AFL, different sort of archetypes, prototypes, that sort of thing, and the way that the game is going. But I think it sort of pertains pretty strongly to the draft as well, because we can use some takeaways from this article to kind of go through that. And I'll, point out a few things that I think even are potentially problems with the article that aren't necessarily the way that I see it as well. So we can kind of go through it together. It is this article on AFL.com by Nathan Schmook. So headline, the new midfield stars leaving the Brownlow Bulls behind. So it's kind of like straight away from that headline, you sort of see probably things that I've been talking about on this channel for the last 6 to 12 months with the draft, just the way that the game is going, the different types of players and that sort of evolution away from probably contested ball, from stoppage heavy players, and more that sort of transition phase of the game, more around speed, power, and endurance obviously built into that as well. But just having those versatile functions that allow you to play sort of more broad roles in the midfield, I guess particularly. So it starts off by saying, going back to that Ollie Wines Brownlow. So when Port Adelaide midfielder Ollie Wines won the Brownlow in 2021, 75% of games were won by the team that won the contested possession count. The best midfielders in the game were the Bulls, Clayton Oliver, Jack Steele, Tom Mitchell, Christian Petrarca, and Jared Lyons, all joining Wines in the top 10 of the Brownlow medal. I mean, that's so interesting, isn't it? Even reading some of those names there, like Jack Steele, particularly, Tom Mitchell, even to some extent, it's sort of hard to believe that he was considered a top 10 player in the competition. I think he's a very good footballer. And Jared Lyons, even there, particularly, he even got delisted at one point. But yeah, certainly not these guys that they're kind of talking about there. Certainly not versatile wouldn't be the first word that came to mind. I think the outlier there a little bit is Christian Petrarca, and he's probably a player within this article that I would disagree with a little bit. I think he is more of that sort of offensive forward midfielder type. He's got a lot of versatile skills. He can overhead mark. I think he's actually a pretty good kick, albeit I think in that Melbourne game plan, he's sort of a little bit ingrained in him. He's got this kick long first mentality based on the way that Melbourne played. So I think he's a bit of an outlier in this article, but there's always outliers when you go into things like this. So yeah, those players were the top 10 of the contested possession count. But there has since been a steady shift away from contested ball determining the outcome of games, with a record low 60% of matches being won in 2025 by the team that owns the hard ball. And then there's this graphic here that I'll put up. So kind of showing here 2025, 60% of games are won by the team that wins a contested possession count. So, it's still a pretty decent number, right? But look how much it's changed since 2016 as you go up the years. It's pretty much progressively getting smaller and smaller, that number. And there are a few rule changes that have gone into that, which we'll discuss later on in the article. But it's also, I think, just the game evolving a little bit and I guess perfecting roles, perfecting tactics with the field, and sort of being able to bring in players that have a greater athleticism, greater technical skills on top of that sort of physical side of the game, I guess, that's always been there. So it's kind of moving away from that. And there are sort of different triggers for that as well. But I just wanted to bring up this graphic here too from the 2021 season, which this article relates to. You can see it here in the individual players themselves. So Clayton Oliver was referenced in that. In 2021, he was the top contested possession winner with 17.4 contested possession overall. 15.6 for Ben Cunnington, Rory Laird had 14.8, and Ollie Wines had 14.8 as well. And you look at it for 2025, the top four there. Tom Green is top with 15.3, so 2.1 less per game than Clayton Oliver won back in 2021. So it sort of shows that even the best in that sort of position that do win contested ball, that's even shrinking a little bit. Second there, McRae with 14.5. Sarong drops down to 13.8 at third, and Gawn 13.7. So things have changed, and as you go down that list, you're sort of starting to bring in different types of players as well, more of those sort of transitional midfielders that we talk about. But it's sort of important to show that data, because I think that is something that really does guide the clubs. When you actually look at this, it's something for them that's actionable. If they can see this data changing and evolving, they will change with it, and they will look to players that can give them more output in different sections of the game. Clearly, again, you always have an outlier, and I probably think the team that has bucked that trend a little bit is Carlton, and probably why you've seen them slide down the ladder so much this season. They've always been a heavy contested possession clearance team, and that was one of the reasons that I perhaps saw them sliding a little bit this season, just that they were very reliant on that part of the game, and it seems to be a trend that is moving outside the game, and other teams are sort of bringing in, and I think it's one takeaway from this video in general. I think it's a subtle change as well with the type of player, because you look at these players like Clayton Oliver, Patrick Cripps, Ollie Wines. They're still looking for those big-bodied mids, but they're probably just looking for a big-bodied mid that has a little bit more on top of that when we look at some of the guys coming through. So, yeah, Carlton, the perfect example of that. They win contested possession and clearance every single week, and they still lose games of footy. So it's definitely moving. It's definitely changing. So it goes on to sort of talk about the new midfielder, this new archetypal, prototypical player that is sort of taking over AFL midfields at the moment. So it says a changing game style has resulted in transition midfielders becoming the AFL's most influential players. Geelong pair Bailey Smith and Max Holmes, Western Bulldogs jet Ed Richards, Greater Western Sydney Flyer Finn Callaghan, Collingwood superstar Nick Dacos, and Gold Coast captain Noah Anderson are now deciding games. So a nice list of players there that all are slightly different, to be fair. Again, you look at outliers amongst the group. I think Nick Dacos is different to a lot of those other players, being that he's a lot shorter than those other guys. I think you look at Finn Callaghan, and he's probably that transition midfielder that has a lot of speed and power to his game. Dacos sort of does it in a slightly different way. He does have a lot of speed to his game, but not necessarily the power element. But there's one thing about all of these guys, most of them being big-bodied mids that are sort of replacing those stoppage-dominant mids, I think. But these guys all have one thing, and that's that they have really great skills to go with it. You could maybe put Bailey Smith at the lower end of that with his kicking skills, but he is a pretty highly skilled player. And I think you look at the other guys on the list, like Noah Anderson, Nick Dacos, definitely, Finn Callaghan, Max Holmes, Ed Richards. They all have great kicking skills. So not only are they, working on the outside to carry the ball for you from defensive 50 to forward 50, but they've also got elite kicking skills. So when they get closer to the arc, they can hit targets inside forward 50, and you're not going to force a turnover, which just in modern football is becoming just so critical that you don't turn the football over, because it's never been more punishable to do that. So that's why you look across these upcoming players, these draftees, you look at players across the competitions, and the guys that don't have good foot skills are becoming a little bit extinct unless they have some crazy skills. And I think Bailey Smith is probably the example of that. Not great foot skills, but he's such a good runner. He's so suited to the modern game athletically that I think that takes over and makes him a superior ball carrier in this modern game. And we'll have a look here at the top 20 rated players as per champion data. So, some people look into these sort of lists more than others. I don't always, take it too seriously with the top rated players, but there's obviously there's definitely a relationship between the champion data rating points and good players in the competition. There clearly is. I think sometimes there's more to it with, moments in games and things like that, but it's a pretty good guide at the very least to use champion data. And you've got Ed Richards there, who really has become that prototypical midfielder. I think the guy that has pace, he's got dynamism, he can run all day, he can get up and back contest to contest, but he's also got that beautiful left foot that he uses as well. Nasiah Wanganeen-Miller, not a midfielder that we're sort of talking about in this video, but clearly a transition player, a high transition player. Jackson, a transition ruckman, someone that gets involved in the game outside that stoppage source. Bailey Dale, a transition player. Riley Thilthorpe there as a key forward, a little bit of a different player, but the one thing that stands out to me about Riley Thilthorpe and why he's done so well is just his skills, just his technical ability. His handballing is really strong, and his field kicking is elite, as well as his contested marking inside forward 50. So that's what makes him such a sort of triple threat overall. Tuke Miller, a highly transitional midfielder, someone that can run. Ash, Blakey and Sinclair. So there's just a major swing away from those contested midfielders like Lachie Neale, Patrick Cripps, Ollie Wines, Clayton Oliver, these types, to more transitional players overall. And that is, as I said before, it's a bit of a point with this. It's not just about big-bodied mids are out or anything like that. I just think that the big-bodied mids that are coming through, they have so much more dynamic to their game. They're all a little bit quicker. They're getting bigger, faster, more athletic. They can mark, they can kick, they can handball. They can sort of do everything, where maybe that, mid 2000s to late 2000s sort of period between 2010 and 2020, you had that sort of big-bodied gorilla type midfielder that could sort of handball, but they probably couldn't do anything else. And I think that's evolving. And it brings us on to this next part of the article, which goes into Nathan Schmuck, the writer, talking with Peter Bell about his thoughts. And I found this part pretty interesting as well. So Bell said, it has happened steadily since the stand rule was introduced in 2021 and is now filtering down to the types of midfielders coming through the talent pathways. It goes in cycles, and right now the prototype is that speed, endurance, transition midfielder who has power and can repeat that power a number of times in a midfield stint. They can also transition really well and help out in defence before bursting forward in offence. Being highly skilled has never changed, but that's where the real value is now. So interesting. There's a few takeaways there. Firstly, the stand rule, which is an interesting point. It's definitely not something that I thought about when I thought about the athleticism of a player and the speed of a player. I think that's maybe something that I disagree a little bit with this article. I probably find the stand rule as more of a rule that's changed kicking. Players that have, are really elite by foot, you can sort of set up that kick mark game, and the stand rule allows them to play on a little bit quicker, get a little bit more space on the mark, and then hit targets in the forward half of the ground. Where I probably see the athleticism part of it, the speed and the power aspect to it, the transitional part of being a midfielder, not necessarily related as much to the stand rule and more just related to the speed of the game growing and just that sort of general athletic evolution of the game overall. So that's probably a point for me that I disagree on. The cycles part, I definitely agree footy changes in cycles, but I don't necessarily agree that, again, speed and power and athleticism is necessarily going to go out of the game. I probably see that as a natural forward momentum of the game, and I think the way that teams play more tactically are the things that are probably going to change in cycles. And then the way that we maybe look at some of those things, I think division of labour across positions, like whether you think about players as we need somebody to do this individual role versus being versatile and they can do a little bit of everything. I think that always is kind of changing and evolving and goes in cycles, but some skills are always got to be there. I think technical skills always have to be there. And I think probably as the game evolves, athleticism always has to be there as well. And all those fundamentals like decision-making and IQ and those sort of things have to be there as well. And I think overall, on this point, I think the article probably fails to mention, it does touch on it a little bit when it says highly skilled midfielders. But I think that's probably the thing that it doesn't talk about enough in this article is the fact that highly skilled kickers are the thing that's probably really changed on that inside position. You want those midfielders to win contested ball, win clearances, but you also want them to be able to spread quickly, and that's probably gaining traction, the ability to be able to spread at top speed and then hit targets around the ground so you can drop into different phases of the game. You can go quickly, you can go long, direct. You can also drop into that sort of 15-metre chip mark game style as well and just control the football and make the team sort of chase you around a little bit. That's obviously a way of conserving energy as well. So a lot to it. I really enjoyed this article. There is a little bit more here on some of the things that coaches said, and it sort of comes into that conversation that I had last year when I made that video about archetypes and, the strike mid, the engine mid, and the defensive mid. They sort of talk about that here. So one of the coaches that they spoke to here, so they identify 4 different types of midfielders: the inside bull like Cripps, the transition midfielder like Smith or Holmes, the power midfielder forward like Bailey Humphrey, and the defensive structural midfielder as well, who will often protect the corridor and ensure the right balance is maintained. This is a role that Scott Pendlebury appears to be playing in his 20th AFL season. So you look at that, it's kind of similar to what I said in that video last year where I broke it down into 3 midfield archetypes. This is just breaking it down into 1 extra as well. So you're sort of breaking that engine midfielder down into 2, a transitional midfielder and a clearance midfielder as well. So either way, I think you can sort of do both. And then you've got that sort of strike midfielder that's a little bit more dynamic, bigger bodied, can't necessarily cover the ground as well. So they sort of play between the forward line and the midfield as well. So something to take. It's basically adding in an extra engine mid. This coach went on to say that you need a combination of guys, but if you're going to err on the side, I would err on the side of having more transition guys. And that was what the leading midfield coach told AFL.com. The trend towards highly skilled transition midfielders having the biggest impact at AFL level has an obvious flow-on effect to the draft as talent programs take advice from clubs on what attributes they need from their players. So this is where it comes full circle, and it does come to the recruiting, it comes to the draft. When you're looking at those top-end players, I think there has been a little bit of a, sort of a malaise with the AFL with this, where those clearance midfielders, it almost goes hand in hand with the Brownlow, and probably my sort of qualms with the Brownlow, because you always do get those high stoppage players that win the Brownlow medals because of the fact that they're really under the umpire's eyes. I don't really blame them for that. It's just kind of how the award is set up. And then that has a knock-on effect of us sort of putting those players up on a bit more of a pedestal as well. And I do think the game has heavily changed in this last 5 to 10 year period. So those players aren't as necessary anymore, and versatility is really key to all of this. So I will get to that with the draft at the end and sort of have a look at that sort of top end of the draft and what this sort of information that you're getting here may sort of lead to with how clubs look at those players. But there is one last bit here from Patrick Dangerfield, and I wanted to talk about this part because I think this is really important about just that importance overall of speed. So Dangerfield says here, and he's talking about Max Holmes, his teammate. He says he doesn't test that well, certainly not in endurance stuff. But if you give him a 5-second break, he can run 200s all day, and that's the game. And this is 100% spot on. He says the game isn't a 15-minute run where you don't stop. It's an effort. It's an effort, a stoppage, and then you go again and repeat. Max's ability to do that is as good as I've ever seen in the competition. So obviously giving his teammate a big a big positive to his teammate there, but also it's very true. Those players that can run at high speed, they are going to overload you over time, just being able to back up from that. And we do these tests like the yo-yo and the 2K time trial and the 3K time trial. You can see even in the testing that those parameters that we looked at previously, like they're getting smaller and smaller. So the yo-yo's gone, the 3K is gone. It's a 2K time trial now. It's probably not even that suitable still. You'd still probably prefer those 200-meter runs, contest to contest, high speed, overload, get from the defense to the offense and bring the ball the entire length of the ground. And that really is the game. And if you've got the skills on top of that, if you can mark on top of that, you can use your hands, you can use your feet, you're going to be a major commodity in the AFL. So the next part just says, while recruiters highlight the growing importance of speed when assessing this year's draftees, Bell said that this did not mean midfield prospects with other strengths had a line put through them, as long as they were absolutely elite in another area of the game. So I think that's still important to note, because it's not really signaling the death of the, contested inside midfielder, and they definitely still do exist. I do think, though, it certainly has an effect with the draft. I mean, you look at players that still exist in that role. Ollie Wines now is really a bit part player. You look at other players also that have sort of relied heavily on that aspect of their game. I look at Pendlebury, who's gone on to really thrive in different roles because of his versatility, because of his decision-making, his high-end skills. Whereas you look at another player like Nathan Fyfe, who was obviously a superstar 5-10 years back, but now that his body's breaking down a little bit, he doesn't really have the athleticism. He never had the kicking skills. So he's just sort of a bull now. He's just sort of a big body. And doesn't really have an elite aspect to his game, I would say. I mean, he can still go in and win a clearance, but it's difficult to carry too many guys like that, and it puts a burden on Freo, I think, when he's in the team. So it's interesting, and it's interesting to see which of the modern players are really thriving. Lachie Neale's probably another one. I think he's just he's been able to adapt and take his game in different directions. I think that's probably been a feather in his cap to be able to stay relevant in the modern game. And he does do that clearance phase and use his hands just to such a high level that I think that's kept him relevant in the game. So I wanted to go through the top 10 players and just have a bit of a talk. When I say the top 10 players, kind of the, consensus sort of players that are talked about the most in this 2025 draft crop. So you've got Cooper Duff-Tytler, obviously, and I think this article is actually, even though he's not a midfielder, I think this does pertain to him quite heavily. Just the fact that he is a ruck that has such a high level of transition ability to his game. The fact that he can, link up across the ground. He can use his speed and athleticism to get into space and get uncontested marks. He can use his field kicking as well. He's a bit of a Luke Jackson in that regard. Just the fact that he can affect the game in so many different ways. He can float behind the ball and be a marking threat as an interceptor. Go forward. He can take a mark there. I know that, people, when they look at these draft boards, they worry about players that don't have a defined position. I found that across, comments and things like that on videos when players don't have a defined position. But when you actually think about the way that AFL clubs are thinking, they're probably thinking that's better because it doesn't lock the player down into one position that may, like we talk about with these clearance midfielders, it may sort of become extinct in the future as well. So you got to think about those things too. And versatility and not having a defined position isn't always bad. It is sometimes, and it sometimes doesn't work out for a player, but it's also a good gateway into the AFL so that you can play some games as well. So that's really Cooper Duff-Tytler. Zeke Ewland, I just think he's perfect with his foot skills. Pretty much, and that goes back to that stand rule conversation. I think that's probably the biggest change for the stand rule. The guys that can kick the footy, they can just drop into different modes. I think it helps the team out so much. And Zeke Ewland really has it all. He doesn't have size, but he's got, pretty good speed to him. He's a physical beast. I think he could play on pretty much any line, and he's just a jet there. Dylan Patterson, the same, just so versatile, so much athleticism and good foot skills as well, which help him out. And Dersma's such an interesting prospect in this draft. I think I could see him going anywhere from pick 1 to pick 10. I feel there is an intensity and a physicality to his game that remains a question mark for me, just where you sort of can't see, you can't make him truly bankable because of that physicality and the maybe over versatility to his game, like I mentioned. But it still wouldn't be a massive surprise if this guy turned to be an absolute jet of the competition and he just sort of fitted in. The way that he moves on the field just looks AFL level, the size of him. He kind of has everything. When we talk about like Richards and Callahan and these modern prototypical midfielders, I think Dersma potentially has the ability to be in that sort of mold. Maybe his first sort of 5 to 10 meters of like his speed isn't absolutely elite and doesn't have that same dynamic, but he's definitely a glider. He's a smooth mover. He can get out of traffic and sort of use the football. Again, the technical skills, I see him as a pretty good kicker of the footy. He's probably not up in the top 3 or 4 players, but I think he's decent there. So he's an interesting one for me and one that I'll talk about when I do my rankings, but certainly a modern player. Now, Oliver Greaves, let's talk about him because he's very interesting. He's probably, to me, the best big-bodied bull-type midfielder in this draft. He's one that can win a clearance, can go in, win a stoppage. He can spread pretty well. Doesn't have elite speed, though. So when you're talking about those transition midfielders, I don't think he's perfect in that. He does use the ball pretty well, though. He's a pretty good short kick over that sort of 20 to 25 meter range. He does have that, drive and sort of penetration to be able to get the ball deep as well. He's not really going to like feather through defenses and really laser you up with his foot skills, but has a little bit more with his ball use and his creative handballing that he can be. But he certainly fits into this group of players that you would call the older breed, being that sort of bull midfielder, similar to Josh Smiley last year. And I would probably put him behind some of those midfielders that have that sort of, higher end disposal, or they have, more speed, more endurance to their game to be able to get from contest to contest as well. Sam Cumming. Now, that's why I have him rated so highly in this draft. He is somewhat of a hybrid, I think, between an Andy Brayshaw or an Isaac Heaney. He covers the ground so well. He's got good speed. He's got aerial ability. Again, he probably doesn't have that sort of surgical kicking like Zeke Ewland or Dylan Patterson, Josh Lindsay, these types of players in the draft. But as far as his athleticism and his general skills with his ball handling and stuff like that, I just think he is such a modern prototypical midfielder. And I think you could see him going in the top sort of 3-4 picks in this draft. Dyson Sharp is more on that Oliver Greaves bull type player, and a reason that I've had him a little bit lower. Great physicality, great competitiveness, great contest, great clearance, all of those sorts of things, and definitely has a role to play at AFL level, but probably the skills on the outside, that transition phase of the game, is a reason that I've had him down a little bit lower, as I've had probably Dan Annable down a little bit lower than some players, albeit I think of all of those inside bully type midfielders, I feel like Dan Annable is probably the best of all of them at covering the ground, just getting from A to B pretty efficiently, pretty quickly, pretty smartly, and then being able to create with his handballing. Also, not a great kick in this crop, but definitely a bankable commodity and somebody that has a role at AFL level. Sam Grill, modern, prototypical, speed, dash, creativity, good ball use, and can go in and win a stoppage and play that midfield role really well. Other than the fact that he's only 182 centimeters, he's a little bit smaller. I think he's very prototypical as a modern midfielder. Mitch Marsh as a third key forward, he's got that ball use, which gives him an edge. And I talked about that with Riley Thilthorpe with key forwards. If you've got a little bit of a weapon on the outside, you've got good field kicking, you can roam a little bit and use that. I think that gives you an edge. And the last one, and why I've had him so high in this crop as well, is Jevon Philippou. Again, you talk about those 3 or 4 groups that you put midfielders into, a highly transitional mid, someone that has elite pace as well. So he's sort of more on that sort of explosive side with his speed. And then he's got so many other elements to his game. He's creative on the outside. He's a beautiful kick off both sides of the body, which is really powerful for him as well. Can take a good contested mark when he drops inside forward 50. And another one that I feel with all of those skills could be in the top 5 of this draft as well. So that is a wrap at looking at Nathan Schmuck from AFL.com's article. I thought it was really good. I thought it was an interesting read and something that sort of fits in with my content really well. So thanks for listening to that, guys. Thanks for going over it with me. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next one.